By and large, we in Sarawak have been very fortunate to have experienced both political stability and racial harmony since gaining independence from the British on July 21, 1963, and subsequently joining to form the Federation of Malaysia on September 16 the same year. During the good years, the Chinese enjoyed equal opportunities in the civil service, education, businesses, and politics. In the old days, there was trust, confidence, and understanding among all communities. The same cannot be said for the current generation of Sarawakian Chinese. Too often, tertiary education and job opportunities deny the deserving children, forcing them to look elsewhere when all that their parents want for them is to live close to home. In the civil service, it is estimated that for every 10 civil servants, only one is Chinese. It has been said that the Chinese are generally not interested in serving the government, but in reality, they are discouraged by the perception that there is a so-called racial quota for government servants, especially at the federal level. In 2011, only 2% of the workforce in the Prime Minister's department was Chinese. By perception, the Chinese community are discouraged from applying to work in the civil service because of constantly being bypassed for promotion and not being recognized for their services on merit. By and large, those having to seek work in the private instead of the public sector carry with them a racial awareness in the workforce of our otherwise harmonious communities. In the Chinese community, it is also an open secret that many parents sell their land and only spend enough to keep a roof above their heads so that they can send their children overseas, a result of the admission quota system which denies many deserving Chinese students places in local universities. Apart from losing out to the quota system, others have to send their children for studies abroad because the quality of our tertiary education has been steadily declining, so much so that many local graduates are now losing out in the fiercely competitive job market. At the moment, only University Malaya is still within the top 200 in the global ranking, but even so, its position is dropping year after year. It was 156 in 2012 and 167 in September 2013. We owe it to our children and future generations to secure their future well-being and competitiveness in the global community with an education system attuned to the realities and demands of the present world. With the education quota system, unequal job opportunities in the public sector and the lack of an education program to meet the needs and standards of the real world, as well as the needs to preserve the cultural diversities among us, the Chinese community have no choice but to persist in sustaining their independent schools to ensure their children have some opportunity for rightful education and a livelihood. Currently, non-Chinese primary school students make up 27% of the total student population of Chinese schools statewide. In fact, out of the 68,900 primary school students in Sarawak, only 19,100 are non-Chinese. At the secondary school level, there are 14 independent Chinese schools in the state, accommodating 7,316 students in 2013, and the number is growing. The average monthly pay of the teaching and non-teaching staff of these independent Chinese schools is only Ringgit Malaysia 2,700, and they are also contributing towards the education of our children. The funding and lack of it for the Chinese schools has become a burden to the parents and the Chinese communities. There are some 46 Chinese primary schools needing immediate repairs and maintenance at a total cost of Ringgit Malaysia 57 million. The federal allocation is Ringgit Malaysia 6 million, only 1/10 of the funds required for maintenance, upkeep, and repair. As for the Chinese independent secondary schools, a deficit of Ringgit Malaysia 12 million was recorded for the year 2013. The income was Ringgit Malaysia 9 million, with operating expenses of Ringgit Malaysia 21 million.
After spending so much on overseas education for my children, it is my fervent hope as a Chinese parent that they return to work in Sarawak and live near us, if not with us. I sent my children to study overseas not by choice. It was the last resort. Their applications to do courses for which they were best suited as per their academic results were turned down by the local universities. What else could a parent in my position have done but to spend my hard-earned life savings on sending my children abroad for tertiary education so that they may have a head start in life? But that's not the end of the story. Despite graduating from recognized universities from abroad, they still fail to get jobs that commensurate with their qualifications in the civil service on their return to Sarawak. Even with their majors in disciplines such as engineering and chemistry, they still had very little job choices. With nowhere to turn, they had to take the heartbreaking decision of leaving their loved ones behind in search of so-called greener pastures elsewhere. All my life, I have understood the importance of working with the ruling government. My father, a Chinese immigrant, was allowed to stay here, and he has since made Sarawak his home. I was born here, and to me, there is no other place to call home other than Sarawak and Malaysia. I have enjoyed the good years where the Chinese were given equal opportunities in the civil service, education, businesses, and politics. Those productive years have made my family and I what we are today. We have not forgotten this. That's why I am still a BN supporter despite the majority swing to the opposition by the Chinese community. At home, my children and I sometimes talk about politics, and despite trying to tell them what I have gone through, it's difficult to convince them the government has been fair to the Chinese community after their unpleasant experience of not only having their university applications rejected, but also the untold difficulties they faced in trying to get a job with the government. Where politics is concerned, there is a general gap between my children and myself. But is it really a general gap? I sometimes wonder. Or is it a bad experience that has led to a change of perspective? The Chinese were fairly treated in the old days when there was trust, confidence, and understanding among all the communities. My Malay friends would sit with me in coffee shops where they would have nasi lemak, while my Dayak friends and I had our kolor mee and a cup of kopi o. We may tease each other about our weaknesses, Chinese being money-faced, Dayak being quick-tempered, and Malay being overly laid-back. None of us would get personal as we were able to laugh at ourselves. We were truly like brothers and sisters back then. Some of our Malay or Dayak neighbors might even be closer to us than our own siblings because they were the ones who would come to our aid first when we needed it. My Malay and Dayak friends and I are still like my brothers and sisters because we still live side by side and constantly look out for each other. But we have been made very conscious of our ethnicity. While we sit together, there are now topics we dare not touch, or at least try to avoid. Now, as Chinese, our children are working in the private sector, while the children of my Malay friends are government servants. For the children of my Dayak friends, they are everywhere. My deep concern is the trust built over the years between my Dayak and Malay friends will fade. One day, when that trust fades into oblivion, there is nothing left as the pillars to support the harmony and peace we have been enjoying all these years. That would spell the end of one Malaysia concept. How sad.
Recently, the status of freedom of religion in Malaysia has become a controversial issue. Questions, including whether Malaysia is an Islamic or secular state, remain explosive and unresolved when it should not be a question, but it is. These, along with contentious incidents, have tested the relationship between the different communities. Yet, by recent events, there are individuals and groups involved in creating such misunderstanding and are not restrained in any way. Certain groups are also bent on implementing hudud law in the country, despite the issue being considered contentious and divisive in our plural society. We should be thankful the Sarawak government is fully aware of the damage religious intolerance and prejudice can do to the prevailing peace and harmony in the state, and has taken steps to prevent such negativities from spreading here. YAB and his team have time and again stressed that as far as the state is concerned, there is freedom of worship. We must continue to support all efforts to preserve and perpetuate this peace and cordial coexistence among the multiracial and multi-religious communities of our beloved state. There should be no compromise on this. Towards this end, the right to practice freedom of religion should not be just the Chief Minister says too. It must be made into law so that no Sarawakians should ever have to live in fear and paranoia again. In 2014, Malaysia has come to a full age of 51. But more than ever, the country is fighting economic disparities, racial tensions, freedom of worship, equal opportunities not only in education and in job opportunities in the public sector, but also in businesses. There is very little doubt that the majority of the Chinese and non-Bumiputra would like the government to get rid of New Economic Policy, or NEP-style policies. The first aim of NEP after the May 13 riot in 1969 was supposedly designed to eradicate poverty and help the indigenous communities to catch up to the non-indigenous, especially the Chinese, whom they viewed had controlled the businesses. But in reality, the NEP was perceived to have marginalized the Chinese community. Its extensive economic, educational, and social benefits to the Bumiputra community on the basis of ethnicity alone had no doubt hampered on the good relationship between communities. Even with such challenges posed for the Chinese community, they accept that the peace and stability of the country hinges on closing the economic gap between Bumiputra and non-Bumiputra, and to persevere on with such inequalities. The older generation of the Chinese may understand this and accept the fate, but the general feeling among the younger generation is that the lingering effects of NEP and other new policies implemented time and again have deprived them of equal opportunities. NEP has not achieved its objective fully, because business opportunities reserved for Bumiputra have not trickled down to the grassroots in all aspects. It has actually instead created an economic gap within the Bumiputra community, with a large section not benefiting from this affirmative action, making it necessary to prolong the NEP indefinitely. In other words, the beneficiaries of the NEP have been those for some selected few. Many lower-income group Chinese believe that their basic needs of lives are held back by the blanket ethnic discrimination they face from a government. All in all, as a result, vast majority of the Chinese translate their unhappiness into votes for the opposition. Equal opportunity and freedom of worship is the start of a giant step to narrow the widening racial and religious rift in our country. Helping one community must no longer be at the expense of other communities. Upholding of Islam as our official religion must not mean curtailing the freedom of worship of other religions. Equal opportunity is the way to achieve all these if we have the will to regain the harmony and stability we once enjoyed.